Peterborough County. And I was really interested in, at the time there was sort of a budding organic movement, and you had a lot of conventional farmers, and they didn't seem to be talking a lot to each other. Some of you may remember those days. I was really interested in sort of understanding how both of those groups and many others understood sustainability and the future ahead, and what could be gained from sort of encouraging a conversation among those groups and others in the county. And that was really, so my project was partly about sustainable agriculture and partly about kind of community development and about building connections among different actors within the county. And it's interesting how this project in many ways kind of is full circle for me, because then when I did my PhD, I ended up looking at the international politics of regulating genetically modified organisms, which was a fascinating topic for many years. But I kind of got tired of hanging out with the suits, and found that I had a real interest in sort of in local issues and in how local organizations and governments are working to address it, knowing, of course, that it's all within an international context, right, and that really shapes what is possible and some of the limitations. Many of you, well, first off, I'm really impressed with who's here today, and the variety of organizational affiliations and government affiliations, local, and then people connected to provincial organizations and even national organizations. This is an example. One of the things that I and Kim came to realize through this research is the amazing assets of Hastings County. While there are challenges within this sector, there are also a whole range of assets. There's physical infrastructure that's still operating and can be used better. There's an amazing knowledge base in the countryside among multi-generation farmers, as well as a lot of new entrants into agriculture who bring other types of training and other types of skills. And there's the wealth of the connections and the kind of connections that you guys represent in this room. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of the discussions today. Many of you will have seen this presentation before, so I will go rather quickly through it. What I would do is, if you haven't read the report yet or leafed through it and pulled out sections that are of most interest to you, please do that. I did it again yesterday and this morning, kind of as just a refresher. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I forgot about that little bit. And some of the stats that are in there and some of the observations and the quotes that came out of the interviews that Kim did in Hastings County really are quite revealing of, like I say, both a place of challenge, but also of opportunity, I think. This project, the research project, is part of a larger research group called FLEDGE. This is an acronym over here, Food Locally Embedded and Globally Engaged, and it brings together researchers and community partners from across Canada, and we have a lot of international links as well, with researchers doing this kind of community-based research on challenges related to the food system in South Africa and Germany and France and other places. And so the kinds of issues that you're dealing with in Hastings County are happening all over the place, and it's fun to be part of a research network that allows us to share those lessons. Carleton University and Hastings are really the core partners in this particular project, and I need to acknowledge the funder of this research is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Also want to say thanks to Kim, who did the interviews, and who some of you will have met in your living rooms and on your farms. Louise did a lot of work on editing the report and contributing to it and helping distribute it. And as you know, Louise does a lot of work setting up these meetings and so on. She was invaluable. Ken Nieder, many of you saw him speak, it was about 1.5 years ago now, from Minnesota. We had him speak in NAIDOC. He works on community food system development across the United States. I think in something like 30 of the states now he's been working as a consultant, and really brings a wealth of knowledge to that issue, and he informed the report. He also did some of the number crunching. He's an economist by training, and so between him and Steve Duff from OMAFRA, that's where we got a lot of the data that's in the report. Steve Duff is the chief economist with OMAFRA. And he's also seen the report at various stages and kind of had some input into how we're analyzing the situation. Other partners, County of Hastings Economic Development, Hastings Stewardship Council, City of Belleville, City of Quinte West, and Community Futures Development Corporation for North and Central Hastings and South Algonquin. And I definitely want to thank all of them. Played different roles, maybe little bits of funding, helping us organize meetings and so on. And so I just want to acknowledge that partnership. How we got here, as mentioned, we did a bunch of interviews with a wide range of farmers, different farm sizes, different types of commodities, north and south and central and Hastings. As you know, there's a huge amount of variability in this county, going from south to north, and you see that in some of the economic numbers and so on. We also did two asset mapping workshops. Many of you participated in those. One was down here in the south end and one in the north, and I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. I'm looking at Louise. I think it was around January.
It was early spring, I think.
Of 2018, though, right? So over a year ago. And asset mapping is really based on the principle of trying to understand what do we already have here, starting from. If we have a vision of a vibrant agricultural system, agriculture and food system for Hastings County, what are the elements that we already have in terms of built assets, social assets, economic assets, natural and services? And so that's how we structured those meetings. We brought some of our preliminary results, had some conversations about them, and then focused in on areas that people at those workshops really wanted to focus on. And that's all built into the report. And you see at the back of the report, we actually have the summary notes from the two asset mapping workshops that were held. Okay, so research results to date. Like I said, I'll go through this fairly quickly, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions as we go along, or over the course of the day that we have together. Two big themes that were really clear to us is that there is a strong understanding among the farmers in Hastings County around the value of sustainability, of wanting to produce sustainably on their lands. What we generally characterize as this ethic of sustainability, and we heard it a lot, particularly around soils and how to manage soils and how to care for the land. And yet, the other big theme was that while environmental sustainability is really important, there's also strong recognition that a strong farm community makes for a strong rural community, which then supports schools and these other types of infrastructure that if you lose that kind of economic base, you start also losing social assets. So that's about the social sustainability and environmental sustainability, but they're both ultimately dependent on farm viability, right, and sustainable livelihoods on farms, which comes partly from the agricultural viability and then can also come from off-farm income sources, and that's all part of the mix that individual farm families have. This is, you've probably seen images like this. While gross farm receipts are still gradually on an incline up, the challenge is the cost-price squeeze, right? That the cost of inputs and operating expenses is going up more quickly than the cost of than the gross farm revenues, and that makes this is 2006, 2011 went up, and then 2016 we see this decline in net cash income for farms, and part of why I think we're here having this conversation is to think about how to turn this around, because the social and environmental sustainability depend on the economics also making sense. We identified, as a way of organizing our data, these three different overlapping groups of farmers, and some of you may see yourself in more than one of these categories. There are the adaptive farmers who have tended to take the advice from government over the years and have competitively done quite well to grow their farms, to get bigger, to get smarter, to be renting land, specializing often in particular commodities, really learning how that commodity works in order to make it work for them. From the interviews, it became clear that even the people who pursued that path and have been quite successful at it, while a bunch of their neighbors have left farming, are also facing the cost price squeeze, right, and are also facing these challenging economic Then we see the entrepreneurs, some of the smaller farmers even in the room, and the people that we interviewed doing things like community supported agriculture, niche markets, niche selling of organics into Toronto markets and so on. There's people doing that within Hastings County and finding ways to make that work, often because they can get a higher return on their product. Maybe they're directly selling at retail prices, or they're value adding on their product. And so that entrepreneurial spirit, I would say, is there among many of the farmers we talk to, and definitely this small cohort that's growing. And often these are younger farmers, and often they have smaller plots of land, and Hastings County is quite suited to starting the kinds of operations that they're doing. And then we have the heritage farmers, which are farmers who, again, some of who are in this room, who have often inherited their farms from their families. They have a real commitment to the way of life of farming, to the land. They can often stay on the farm because the competition for land is a little lower in Hastings County than it is, say, in southwestern Ontario. And yet they're also facing the cost price squeeze, and many of them are feeling, frankly, terrible that a farm that they've inherited over multiple generations, they might be the people who are forced to sell, and which then leads to some of our recommendations. Of course, they're not all selling. They're also doing well, and these are also, using used equipment and finding ways to make ends meet with limited resources is really a strength for many of the producers we talk to. Off-farm asset income is both an asset and a curse. Many of the farmers we talk to really don't like the fact that they have to rely significantly on off-farm income. More than 50% of the farms in Hastings County have another income. Sorry. Yes. More than 50% of the people who are actually the farm operators have another job. And then 80% across Ontario of farm income is based on off-farm sources. And that is certainly true in Hastings County as well. And I think it's important to recognize that that's both a challenge, because many people feel very frustrated about the economics of that, but it's also a huge asset. The fact that there are jobs that one person or both people in a farm partnership can have outside the farm is part of what allows those farms, and thus the rural communities that depend on them, to continue to survive. Intergenerational is the succession. Succession is a challenge, especially if you have high debt loads, if you have high investment in the property. But in fact for all of the kinds of farmers. And we did note, of course, that there are some organizations that are working with farmers on this, like OMAFRA, National Farmers Union, Federation of Agriculture, and others. And this is part of why we're all sitting in this room together. New farmers bring enormous skill sets. Many are not trained in agriculture. Many are trained in marketing and communication and engineering and environmental studies and whatever else, and then decide to become farmers. Sometimes young people, sometimes late, doing a career shift in their 50s. And they bring enormous assets, and yet they have not always felt welcomed in traditional farm circles. And I think that's something that we can talk about today. Because one of the things that we note about those three types of farmers is that as the farm community shrinks as a whole, it's less than 1,000 operating farms in Hastings County these days, of which, all those different sizes and types. They're reliant on each other, just like they always were, right? But they have fewer neighbors to rely on these days. And so figuring out how to build social connections among the different types of farmers is really important for the future success. There are opportunities for building more local links in the food system. This is a graph produced through OMAFRA software that just shows, these are all the vegetables and fruits that people eat within the county of Hastings, how much they consume in kilograms, how many acres that would demand, and how many acres are actually produced in Hastings County. And for example, say in apples, we kind of know the story of what happened to apples in this county, but there's 82 acres in production, but people are consuming 227 acres worth of apples within the county itself in any given year. Now, don't read this too simplistically that, okay, we can just shift everything to be producing this stuff and everything's going to work, because the economics doesn't necessarily work, right? There are reasons why some of this used to be produced in Hastings County and has shifted elsewhere. Nonetheless, there are also opportunities in here, and I think that identifying those opportunities and figuring out how to make them work is part of the challenge these days. Regulation can be a huge challenge. Zoning, regulation, we heard an array of stories where farmers are trying to do things differently, trying to succeed, and then facing these barriers. And so I think it's important for anybody who works in, like I say, at the county level or provincial level, to really keep an ear out to what are those particular regulatory barriers, and are there any ways to get around that, to reduce red tape, to actually allow the entrepreneurial spirit that's there with some of the farms to succeed. As I mentioned at the beginning, Hastings County, the depth of experience both in this room and then across the county is enormous. And if there are ways to share more of that and allow, for example, new farmers to connect with farmers who have been at it for multiple generations. There's a lot of learning that we heard the stories of people who were learning that way, and we think there's more opportunities for building those things. And so, finally, the last general point from the research was just to acknowledge that there are a lot of assets here within the county that we can draw upon moving forward. Now, the recommendations, I will simply go through them quickly. Address the economic crisis in part as a mental health challenge, because farmers of all those types are really struggling, and I'm not sure how well the service sector is really acknowledging that and working on that, but happy to hear more on that. Organize field days, workshops, conferences, events that allow new and experienced farmers to come together and plan futures together. Increase the level of coordination and collaboration. In fact, I think it's this third point that leads to this meeting today. Harvest Hastings said, let's bring the organizations, public and nonprofit and so on, together in a room to figure out, are we connecting as well as we need to be to supporting agriculture in the county. Develop a core mission at county and civil levels supporting community-based food system development. There are real opportunities in making links between local consumers and producers. There are limitations as well, because Hastings County has low per capita income, but there's people of varied income in the county, and there's various opportunities for connecting if done carefully. Number 5, develop an inventory of community agriculture and food infrastructure and services important to the community, and identify supports needed to maintain them. Abattoirs, veterinary services, there's a lot here, but a lot of it is under pressure, and it would be important to know where that infrastructure stands, and is it going to be with us going forward? Is it being run by a family that wants to retire out of the business? And how do people start working with that family to make sure that the infrastructure is there for the next generation? Undertake feasibility studies to assess potential new community food infrastructure where appropriate. The idea of a local food hub, or various ideas like this really came up through the research, and I think it might be time to, and that might be different north and south, so it might be time to just sort of do some feasibility studies to see what makes sense. Similarly, sorry for the choice of colors here, so you can't read this. Develop virtual food hubs using social media. Some of the farmers we talk to are really connecting with their customers through social media, which is different than just listing their products on a website. It's like that active connecting, and I think that's more of that can happen. Mobilize consumer support through outreach campaigns. So, for example, the 5 for Farmers, I just pulled this off the internet yesterday. Ken Meters worked with this organization in the States, which says, if everybody in this county would spend $5 a week on local agriculture, that's $35 million a year for local farming. Develop coordinated marketing strategies for farmers markets and other venues, stores, and restaurants selling local food. Again, connecting tourists in some parts of the county, but also locals with what is being produced here and really celebrating that and making those connections. 10, 11, and 12 are all about collaborating. turning food banks into community food centers, for example, that are not just about getting free food, but also about learning food skills, about advocacy around food, and in some cases connecting with local farmers. Collaborate to address the farm succession challenge. Collaborate to enable land access and mentoring for new farmers. And I'm glad someone like Pat is here as part of a regional organization that does some of this kind of work, of both making opportunities available for local farms, but also I think with them on the mentoring piece, right? 13, protect farmland through zoning, tax incentives, etc. And 14, review all agriculture and food-based regulation through a small business lens. You know, recognizing there are different sizes of farmers. Some of that 1,000 farms I mentioned, that's everybody who's making over $7,000 in gross, bringing in over $7,000 in gross farm receipts a year. But we know that there's many people who identify as farmers that are still smaller than that. And my time is done. So I just want to say thank you very much for paying attention, and I look forward to being part of the conversation today. I'm happy to address questions as we go along.